Good day, everyone, and welcome to IDxConversations Design's New Purpose, the Philippine session of World Industrial Design Day. My name is Bertie Salva, General Manager and co-founder of Curiosity Design Research, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. As the first among the signature events of the Design Center, IDX also serves as a kickoff event for the celebration of the Design Center of the Philippines' 50th founding anniversary, which will take place this September. Congratulations in advance, Design Center. Today, as we celebrate the World Industrial Design Day, we are also invited to take some quiet time off, and ask ourselves, how has our relationship with design changed? And more importantly, how can our work today as designers and design professionals impact this generation and the generations to come? These are very loaded and heavy questions, but today I dare ask everyone to have this great conversation. So to unfurl and unravel how design has morphed and taken on a new face, or our new purpose rather, what we have in store for you today is a meaningful and exciting roundtable discussion featuring an eclectic mix of Filipino design innovators and leaders who have courageously and strategically incorporated the welfare of future generations in their design approach. Now, to formally open today's session, I'd like to welcome Executive Director of the Design Center of the Philippines, Ms. Ria Matute.
Hi, my name is Ria Matute, and I am the Executive Director of the Design Center of the Philippines. On behalf of the Design Center, I would like to thank each and every one of you for being with us today to celebrate the World Industrial Design Day. Design Center will be marking its 50th anniversary later in September. Reflecting on these past 50 years, design has indeed had quite a journey and an evolution. We would like to think that Design Center has played a pivotal role in shaping these changes, driving advancements, and setting new standards within the Philippines, and have likewise been instrumental to influencing how this Philippine design and the country is viewed and experienced beyond our borders. However, as we celebrate the World Industrial Design Day today, we as a community, we as designers, we must take on the call of Henry Shue and embrace our responsibility as the pivotal generation. With the state of the planet and of humanity, how do you use our talents, our voices, our actions to shape the future that we want, which is the theme of the 2023 celebration of the World Industrial Design Day. Design Center of the Philippines commemorates the World Industrial Design Day through the IDxConversations, the annual roundtable for maverick thinkers and local change makers, where we host a conversation on how we can contribute productively to these global conversations and challenges that humanity is facing, and beyond conversations, influence impactful action and change. Design Center, since the enactment of the Philippine Design Competitiveness Act 10 years ago, has been proactively changing the nature of the conversation and the approach on design, beyond mere aesthetics, towards strategic innovation and cultural and national transformation. Through this journey, we have met fellow travelers along the way, some of whom you will meet today. Abby Mapua of Kind Mind Experience Design, Bianca Carage, a social designer and artist, Cara Rosas of Local Lab Surigao, and Bertie Salva of Curiosity Design Research. To these maverick thinkers and change makers, we are giving them the IDxConversations platform as a space to share with you their thoughts on how we, as a community, is shaping the future we want, and underscore design's new purpose, urgent purpose for the pivotal generation. But is it really new? Robert L. Peters, graphic designer, design activist, writer, said back in the 1990s, design creates culture, culture shapes values, values determine the future. Mr. Peters passed away earlier this year, but in one of his blog entries, he briefly wrote that at the same time he said those words, he also issued an advisory conclusion regarding the power of design and the ensuing responsibility of designers. And this is the part that people may have overlooked. In celebration of the 2023 World Industrial Design Day, I would like to honor Mr. Peters and quote his full message. Design creates culture, culture shapes values, values determine the future. Design is therefore responsible for the world our children will live in. Good morning and maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ria. That definitely set the tone for today's conversations. Now, before we proceed, we'd like to acknowledge our partners who made this event possible: World Design Organization, Kind Mind Experience Design, Curiosity Design Research. Thank you so much to everyone for your relentless support. All right. For those of you who are tuned in live right now, we are streaming on the DTI Design Center Facebook page. Don't forget to tag us in your posts and stories with the hashtag IDX2023 and hashtag World Industrial Design Day. So, without much further ado, let us all welcome the speakers we have for today. Ms. Abby Mapua, Bianca Carage, Cara Rosas, and Karina Abola. Our keynote speaker is one of the leading women in experience design in the Philippines. She is the president and co-founder of Kind Mind Experience Design, a lab that enables businesses and organizations to design experiences and services that drive sustainability and equitable impact. Abby Mapua is also the service design consultant for UNDP Philippines, localizing e-governance for accelerated provision of services projects. This aims to transform local governance in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao through service decentralization and fostering a culture of innovation in public service delivery. She's also the founding director of the Hub of Innovation for Inclusion at the De La Salle College of St. Benilde, and she received her master's in environmental science at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And she also studied experience design at Chaos Pilot in Denmark. Let us all welcome to the IDX stage, Abby Mapua.
Hi, good day, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Birdie, for the kind introduction.
Nice to have you here.
All right. So shall I begin? Okay. All right. The new purpose of design. Birdie, purpose, the word purpose in itself is such a heavy and a big word already. And then you add new pa. So, this is such a challenging task for me. And by no means do I say that I am an authority to talk about new purpose, but I will be speaking from my experience. So new purpose of design, when we talk about purpose, we know that this is born out of internal or something external to us that happened. So it could be out of personal experiences, it could be out of passion or interest that we have in life. It could be actually born out of pain and suffering that we see around us, or it could be born out of the joy that we see around us and we want to spread this thing. So this is what perhaps purpose is all about. Sorry, I'm having trouble with it. Okay. So if there is any message screaming at our faces right now, it is actually the fact that in this day and age, we are definitely in an age of uncertainty and volatility. I will take us through a few of these shared scenarios that establish the volatility of the times that we live in. In the Paris Agreement, it aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And there is also an agreement to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But sadly, overall global emissions have continued to rise, and many countries are actually not meeting the targets that they have aspired and declared. So the IPCC has actually warned that current efforts to reduce emissions are actually insufficient. And to bring this one to the local context, summer is over in the Philippines as of this month, and we are entering the rainy months. And as per usual, we are already preparing ourselves that extreme weather events may happen. And so far in the last 5 years, it has been happening at a yearly basis and perhaps even more than once a year. The Philippines ranking 5th globally in terms of vulnerability to natural disasters. We are definitely experiencing climate change at its worst. Further, bringing this down to the local context, to add to the vulnerability of the country, the Philippines is also, even though the Philippines is a low contributor to carbon emissions, it is also sad that our contribution to the problem is not in the emissions, but actually as a carbon sink, right? So at the rate of deforestation in the Philippines is very worrying. Out of our 30 million forest cover, we only have 7 million left. So this is one shared example of how we are feeling this age of vulnerability. Another one is, if perhaps more Filipinos are well aware of the EDCA agreement, and this is the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the United States and the Philippines. This was actually signed in 2014 and entered into force in 2016. But as of 2023, we are seeing a strengthening of this agreement. And this is essentially to promote cooperation and interoperability between armed forces of the United States and the Philippines. But what is the relevance? Because of this one, geopolitical dynamics is actually very, very fragile. We know that the presence of the United States in Philippine waters, in the Philippines, is actually creating tension between the United States, Philippines, and China. So there is actually a rising, an increase in polarization in terms of opinion. And we could say, I mean, I could personally say, war clouds loom above us, and, anything could just happen. So another shared scenario that we have that actually portrays an age of volatility is COVID-19. And, a lot of scientists have been talking about that COVID-19 is just one of the many more pandemics to come. And what makes this really worrying for us is that the Philippines experienced perhaps one of the longest lockdowns. Another challenge that we have locally is the alarming deterioration of the quality of and access to learning in the Philippines. So the Philippines has generally scored below global average in all three areas of competencies: reading, mathematics, and science. And this is actually very worrying for the private sector, because of they're foreseeing a low quality of workforce in the future. Perhaps the last one that I could say, like a major causes of volatility, is actually technology. The dizzying speed and acceleration of technology, AI in various capacities, augmentation, and all are all becoming a norm. Soon, transhumanism is not anymore just a concept that we read in sci-fi, but it is actually something that is happening. One of my favorite sci-fi authors, William Gibson, he talked about the future is already here. It is just not evenly distributed. This is true globally, but I feel like this is more emphasized in the Philippines. The inequality in the access and capacity of Filipinos to manipulate technology the gap is so much wider in the country. This is more emphasized. So, what can we say? I've been facilitating strategic foresighting for different organizations, and what these organizations, including I, have sensed, let's say, for example, in early 2020, when we do foresighting, you do a lot of trend watching and sensing. And what we have sensed in 2020 are actually too conservative. So what is that saying is that we underestimate the speed of change and how volatile situations are becoming. So I feel like, practicing strategic foresighting right now, we should be more aggressive in terms of the speed of change, and actually be more, how do you say this? Be more sensitive to what's happening, the small clues that are happening, and how it could immediately become a bigger signal of change. So what we're saying here is every day, literally now, every day is becoming the future. Our actions and non-action will definitely shape our very near future. So what is this actually saying? In such a highly volatile and uncertain world, what is the world asking of us right now? So every minute, we are presented with choices. So if you see this quadrant, this is actually the direction of the choices that we could go into. So if you want to go in the direction of fear, and fear, you want to go in the direction of fear or hope, nostalgia, or a revolution. So let's take each route. So taking the route of a detour is actually being nostalgic of how good the past has been, and in denial that the world is changing. So that's the direction of nostalgia and hope. So that's a detour, and actually that is false hope. It's for sure right now we cannot say that we could bring back the old times. Perhaps there are certain things in the past that could be brought, it could still be relevant, But to say that, you could just live the way you lived in the past, I don't think it's going to work. And then taking the route of nostalgia and fear is like saying, I'm throwing in the towel, the world is imploding and exploding. What for? What are actions for? Now, taking the route of discipline and control is being resigned that you are powerless, that we are all powerless, and submitting to authority and the influence of the direction of authority is just something that we just have to give into. So any control is beyond each person. So where does that leave us? And this is why the choice to move towards transformation is compelling. It is the most empowering. It is where you sense your agency the highest. You have a power. Each person will have a power to shape the change that they want to see now and into the future. And this is actually how we become brave. We take stock of what we have within us, that we can individually and collectively move towards this transformation. If you notice, transformation is in the direction of hope and revolution. Hope is really good, but it is not a strategy. Design is a strategy. So therefore, even though we are in the age of volatility and uncertainty, this is also the age of bravery. In this age of bravery, we are actually called to do at least two things. First is, number one, we have to start questioning the status quo. What are the things that are happening right now that we feel are not right, will not shape the future that we want? So we have to start asking the fundamental and hard questions that perhaps no one is asking, because they might be resigned, because perhaps they want to live in the memory of the past. And whatever it is, brave people will start to have asking these hard questions. Second, once you've asked those questions, we need to start thinking and designing of ways to transform the status quo. It would actually be very interesting to find out later what each person in the conversation are actually thinking about, and what are the urgent questions that you have to ask. So for the sake of demonstration, I will volunteer one question. This is just one question. So this is the question of, how might we shift our economic systems from taking and wasting to something that is regenerative? This is just one example. So framing a question from a different mental model, and this is the mental model of something that is not our present way of working or producing goods and services, which is really taking and wasting. What if we actually take the model of the earth, which is of the planet, which is actually regenerative? So if you look at this diagram, anything below the line is actually just doing less harm, right? And so far, the model that we are following globally is to actually reach the model of sustainable development, which is just right there, just very neutral. But like I said earlier, one problem, which is climate change, it cannot anymore just about just doing in a good way, or just be able to balance. We have to actually go in the direction of replenishing, restoring, healing, and actually regenerating ecosystems. So if we frame the conversation in this way, we will actually see a bigger solution set. So seeing economics from the lens of our dependence on the biosphere alone allows us to design systems that can go beyond sustaining, but could actually lead to healing and regeneration. I will show you why this could actually be problematic. So right now on your left, or perhaps on your right, the sustainable design model are three separate spheres, right? There are three separate spheres, and they are not, it seems like they exist separate from each other, right? And actually achieving the intersection among the three is quite tricky. It is very difficult. And we know this one from years and decades of actually trying to achieve sustainable development. But the reality is we are not three different spheres, right? Society lives within the biosphere. Economics lives within the biosphere. So why are we portraying it as three different spheres? So I'm just presenting this one as an example, because if we start adopting a mental model that is different from the dominant, then perhaps we could see different ways of solving the problem of waste and pollution. So this is just again one example. So the question again is, how might we catalyze economic and social systems that are centered on people and planet well-being? So I share that example because I feel like that is one good example of how framing, the process of framing challenges, inspires hopeful activation in the process of design. So I want to share with you the Danish design ladder, which actually describes how to build design maturity in organizations. So from the lowest level we're in, there is no use of design, to the second level, which is design was used for aesthetics or styling. This is a very helpful framework to show how design activation can address challenges pertaining to aesthetics, to that of innovation, and finally to business strategy. Now, let's take this one a notch higher. So, inspired by the speaker last year from the International Design Conference, Sam Buckalow, he presented what they created with the Australian Design Council, which is to add 2 more layers to the ladder. And this is design that is community and organizational transformation. And then the last one is design as a national level competitive strategy, which is essentially pointing out that design shapes the thinking and behavior of people at the higher level orders of design. If you now complete this whole picture, you could actually see and understand from this perspective that definitely design is systematic problem solving. It is arising first and foremost. There is a challenge. There is a pain. There is a burden. There is a scenario that we want to make things better, whether we are in a community or in an organization or in our own lives. So design is definitely a systematic way of problem solving. But the challenge is design is only possible if we have designers, right? So more importantly, more than the design itself, is the existence and the presence of designers. Designers are problem solvers. They are an empowered and enabled person. We know that this design ladder will actually crumble without a stable and level ground to stand on. And designers are actually the level ground that design could stand on. That is the foundation, and that is where our challenge lies. The 2020, this is the data that I got, the 2020 poverty incidence was estimated at 16.6%. What does this tell us? The country faces various forms of inequality, income inequality, wealth, disparities in the access to basic services and opportunities, limited access to education, healthcare, and other essential services for many Filipinos. The disparity becomes more pronounced between rural and urban areas. So that being said, access to design competencies is not something that is quite urgent, right? Because a lot of Filipinos are thinking about food, shelter, education, basic rights, basic access to these opportunities and services. But we also know that key to addressing these problems is the process of design and having more problem solvers. So it is that delicate push and pull. So the skill and agency to design remains in the hands of the few in the country. So we do have pockets of strategic design and transformational design, and I believe the people in the room can start talking about that and sharing that later on. But for me, we are so few. These are so few a number of people, and they are far in between, that the impact is not widely felt. So we cannot reach this pinnacle of design maturity, of collective transformation, and also as a national strategy if too few Filipinos are enabled to actually practice design. So one of the critical aspects of design is the diversity of frames by which a person can observe and understand the world. I will just show this model that we have in KindMind in terms of scaling transformation. So scaling transformation could actually be seen as 3 things, 3 levels. First level is actually scaling deep. So when we talk about scaling deep, this starts with a personal or individual transformation. When a person starts, eyes open and seeing things, what could I do for myself and what could I do for others as well? So after you actually go through a process of personal transformation, what happens naturally is your relationships also get transformed and you rub off on people and you actually start influencing other people. So this is now when, the work of transforming relationships happen. And these two aspects are actually part of scaling deep. Before we could actually, because when we talk about scale, a lot of times what we think about and what we imagine is replication in numbers, right? That is correct. But before you could actually reach the replication in numbers, which is scaling out, transforming collectives, a deeper work of transformation needs to happen. And then perhaps the highest level of transformation is when you actually start transforming policies, systems, and infrastructures. So I feel like it's very important that, in the work of problem solving, we first look at the inner transformation of a person. So therefore, I share with everyone, and this is with what I am seeing based on my practice, is that the new and urgent purpose of design in the Philippines is to build the agency of a person, to enable a change maker populace. So we need to build the agency of each Filipino to deeply understand the circumstances that they are in. This is a volatile age, but there is a need for us to be actually stepping out and be brave. They can start feeling powerful to design the future they deserve and take action. So if we are to go through that process of building the agency of a person, certain shifts need to happen. So the first one is we need to shift from, yes, we feel discomfort. Yes, we feel challenge. Yes, we feel suffering and we feel pain. What insights could we get out of these things? How could we actually start seeing the problem in a different light, perhaps, and glean some insights on how these things could actually provide opportunities and not just discomfort? So this is the first shift that we need to get into. The second one is shift from limitations to imagination. So right now we are overwhelmed with the challenges, we are overwhelmed with the problems. And a lot of times when we are overwhelmed, we cannot seem to imagine a better scenario. But a major challenge to actually problem solving is not being able to imagine. Imagination is so key to problem solving. Imagination is so key to actually designing a better future. I mean, just remember when we were children, right? When we were children, when we did not have concept of limitations or we did not have concept of, adulting, things are just so much more fun, right? Things are just so much more fun. Things are more playful. Things seem possible. And I think we need to go back to that way of thinking and way of imagining and how powerful that tool is. That it's something that we cannot lose as adults. The third one is actually a shift from cultural homogeneity to pluralism. Birdie, you mentioned earlier my work with the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. And these series of photos are actually taken from my work with them. And what's interesting about the work with them is that we have been training public servants. So these are individuals who work in the different ministries and in different local government units in the BARM region. And they all come there and they talk about, they're public servants. They're given a task to do, so they implement, right? They never felt so much that they are actually empowered to create change, to actually start perhaps, making the system better. So it was very interesting that in those many days of being with them, having conversations and training, how we came up with this empowering experience that, we have different perspectives and we have different lenses in how to problem solve. They've never seen themselves as problem solvers. They saw themselves as implementers. So I feel like it was a very inspiring season to be actually working with them, because they started seeing themselves that my perspective as a Muslim woman is actually is actually very important in terms of designing a better service, in terms of bringing integrity back to the experience of public services, in terms of perhaps bringing humanity to something that we will soon be digitizing. So even though it's a digital transformation project, very important take is that the women are actually thinking about how could this experience be nurturing, right? So it was very important that differences in culture was actually integrated into the whole experience. So how could we actually bring about pluralism in terms of our work of change making? Because a lot of times the dominant mindset is always the autopilot, the direction that we go into. The next one is actually a shift from, very much similar to the fourth shift, is actually a shift from determinism to democratization. So democratization is actually mainstreaming the process and the practice of design. How could more people be actually part of the process of design? Like I mentioned, a lot of the public servants never thought that, you know what, I could actually start redesigning these services in very simple ways, in very simple tweaks, by having conversations with the receivers of the service, and I could actually get insights from their pain, from my pain. I could actually get insights into how could we design better. And that was a very eye-opening experience, that, you know, if you start actually giving the power or enabling people to be part of the process of design, it could actually happen. So they never thought that they could, because there was no opportunity. So for me, it's really just a matter of giving the opportunity and opening up these spaces that we could practice together. I think there was a mistake in the number of shift. There's a double. So this is the last one. How could we shift from me to we? So what do I mean by this one? There was a conversation I had with an artist in Mindanao, and his name is Ambo. And he talked about the need to have spaces, shared spaces that we could thrive in, right? So, like I said, that conversation with the public servants in BARM would never have happened if we never designed a space where we could come together and really talk about what is happening in your work. What's the pain happening? What's the pain? What are the challenges? What are the sources of hope and joy? So if we have these spaces of conversation, then definitely together we could actually design changes. So I feel like for this building of personal agency, these kinds of spaces need to be initiated, and it cannot be something that's just happening like ad hoc or every now and then, but it has something that to be made regular, right? So that we could actually start mainstreaming it. So those are the 5 shifts. Again, I would say it's the new and urgent purpose of design is to build individual agency. We need to enable all Filipinos. I want to make it this grand because, you know, a vision needs to be big, right? It has to be bigger than us, bigger than my time frame, perhaps. So we need to be able to enable all Filipinos to participate in the transformation process. I feel like I should end with that one. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abby. So it's actually quite funny because like throughout your whole story, it's like you brought us through a journey. Like when you were started off sharing all of the different challenges, the problems, like there was so much fear, like climate change, everything, you know, it's all of the problems, all of the changes happening so fast. And it's our response to that change that is the only thing that isn't happening fast. So, but as you told your story and sharing your frameworks, then it gave at least me a glimmer of hope. So I think that's also like, again, the power of stories as well. So with that, I'd like to invite our first reactor to give her thoughts, and especially someone who's a storyteller. So our first reactor is Bianca Carage, a Netherlands-based Filipino artist and social designer who creates virtual environments and objects, exploring alternate worlds and futures. With a master's degree in social design, she combines research and world building to craft visually captivating narratives reflecting on social issues and emerging technologies. One of her notable projects is Gen C, Children of 2050, which envisions 4 types of children in the year 2050 and examines the impact of climate change on learning, play, lifestyles of these children. So let's all welcome Bianca Carage. So Bianca, what do you think of Abby's presentation?
I thought that, hello everyone. First of all, um, yeah, I thought it was great. I thought that there were several things I could really resonate with, specifically um, what you said on individual agency and how imagination is actually key. First of all, I guess I'll start with individual agency. I thought that that's a really important thing um, to bring up, first of all, because I think that, a lot of people tend to delegate their like sense making or problem solving to professionals. Um, and I think with, let's say, traditional design education, I think a lot of designers believe that it is their job to solve other people's problems. But I think that's actually, I mean, it's part of it. But then I think a huge part of it is also empowering other people to think about ways to solve their own problems and being this mediator between, people and solution. Um, and also, at the end of the day, anything that we make is a direct reflection of how we see the world. It's a reflection of our values. Um, and yeah, it reflects what we value, what we believe, and the solutions that we make are, yeah, they really say a lot about how we see the problem. And so to have more diversity in, yeah, solving problems and just communicating how we see problems, I think is, it's everything. But also with imagination, yeah, I work a lot with technology, and I think this is so important in, um, designing the future of tech. And it's especially important when technology is emerging because I think with a lot of designers, but also like not just designers, not just creatives, but literally maybe everybody working in the technology space, a lot of the time people are just designing different versions of the same thing. And instead of radically imagining the future, they just design different versions of the present. And I think social media, for example, is one example of that. Um, yeah, it's just the new social media platform is a lot of the time more of the same thing. It's like hyper productivity, surveillance, attention economy. Yeah. And to be able to imagine beyond that, beyond like different versions of the same thing, but really like a complete shift in values, I think um, is the most, would be the most helpful.
All right, thank you so much, Bianca, for your sharing. Now, to continue, our second reactor comes all the way from the beautiful island of Siargao. Cara Rosas is an agriculture and natural resources economics postgraduate student at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and a co-founder and director of Local Lab, a grassroots NGO based in Siargao Island that aims to champion sustainability and empower the local community. Before working at Local Lab, Cara volunteered in several organizations such as Grameen Foundation, where she worked on financial literacy programs, and International Care Ministries, where she studied the bottom 7% of the Philippines. She also helped two social enterprises for stay-at-home moms and local artisans. Let's all welcome Miss Cara Rosas. Cara, what's your reaction to Abby's presentation?
Yeah, so hi guys, thanks so much for having me here. I'm so happy to be here in person. And I guess when Abby was talking about her presentation, I noticed myself nodding a lot and like really agreeing with everything that you said. I think most often, like the reason why I also moved to Siargao and why I moved to the island, I wanted to be where the solutions were at. I wanted to be at the frontline communities and really get to witness the stories that they were sharing and that they had. And being in the island for about more than 4 years now, it's really in the stories where I see that we could find solutions, the co-creation of solutions, giving them the tools to find that empowerment. I guess, like it really starts from what you were saying, your experience with the Barm region and how when these ladies who witnessed like that we gave value to their voice and their importance and that they could just have much as a stake in what they were sharing into the solutions really finds more empowerment. And I think that's really something that we do here in Local Lab. Like our vision is a big vision, which is for Siargao to become that model sustainable island. I mean, the Philippines is an archipelagic country and you see that we have over 7,000 islands, but a lot of our solutions still come from big urban cities or rural cities. And what we want to show is that solutions are at the island communities and are at the forefront level. Centuries ago, like these islands knew how to be self-sustainable. They grew their own food, they fished for their own food. The community raised the children together in order to educate them. And kind of coupling that local knowledge with technology and innovation, kind of what you were mentioning, and just like seeing how much transformational change can happen with that. So at Local, like one of our biggest flagship programs now is really building a school for island communities. It's called Tropical Academy. And this is where we really wanted to showcase how solutions are at the island levels. A lot of the programs that we're building up in the school are vocational programs that we witness are the needs for islands. For example, Siargao being a touristic island, we do have hospitality, farming. With the farming that we engage with in Local is really regenerative farming and nature-based agriculture. It's kind of showing the farmers that utilizing what's existing on the land, they can then bring that back to the soil and really just provide and have a more food-secure island. We're also going into hospitality and carpentry and regenerative design and carpentry. But then what makes our vocational school different is how we're coupling that with the sustainability concept, circular economy, and it's just giving the locals the tools to really be able to explore their mind and just showing them that they have a significance. Because one thing that I noticed that when you show them that we do believe in them, it really fills us with so much hope. Because you see that the solutions really, when you're working together as one, when you have the local community at the forefront, when you have all these local stakeholders, the different partner organizations just coming together, that's really where I see tangible change can happen. And for example, like even from the fishermen that we work with, the farmers that we work with, just listening to their stories, there's so much solutions that come out from them. It's really realizing that everyone just has so much to play as a part. That's the change that we're hoping for. And I think something that, like you said earlier about like giving that hope, it's really like imagining that this future is possible. And when the community is put at the forefront, I mean, for example, like in Siargao, we did face a typhoon, a Category 5 typhoon 2 years ago. And I really witnessed the behavioral change of people then, because it then put them at the front line of the climate crisis. They witnessed the wrath of nature. They witnessed how much could change over time. And I guess that's really when the vision of Local Lab further grew, because we were fighting for a self-sustainable island. And that's when people saw the importance of that. People saw that we need food security, that we need livelihood security. And this is really rooted in the people. That if you give them the tools to witness that, then we're able to create more change.
Nice. Thank you so much, Cara. And super, again, I'm once we get to the Q&A, again, I have more questions for all of our reactors. But for now, we'll go to our third and last reactor for the day. It is Design Center Senior Officer, Karina Abola. So Cara is a design strategist and social researcher with a background in psychology and design. Throughout her career, she has built visual and verbal narratives through branding across a wide range of industries, while deepening her understanding of Filipino life through Psikolohiyang Pilipino and research. Today, she serves through the National Government Agency for Design, the DTI Design Center of the Philippines, as a senior officer at the Design Promotions Division. She plays a vital role in promoting the value of design to both Filipinos and the global community. So welcome to the IDX stage. Car, what are your thoughts on Abby's presentation?
Thank you so much. I'm so nervous. I guess I'm very happy to share my thoughts and generally my insights and opinions coming from these different places that have influenced me so much. So coming from my background in branding and my MA in psych currently, I feel like my this very strong influence of indigenous psychology and Psikolohiyang Pilipino really kind of builds the foundation for everything that I do, even if it's not really very directly related to design. So everything I do kind of bleeds into each other, and so the things that I'm going to express today are kind of the melting pot of all of these experiences and insights as I've gone through my short career. So I did prepare a reaction just so I don't forget anything, because there is so much insight in what Abby has shared, and I'm glad also to hear in the development of her presentation and in how the other actors have reacted, that we seem to have very common thoughts, even though we come from different spaces in design. So I'm just gonna go ahead and read read what I wrote here. So um I kind of have four points to go through, and the first part is really more about this whole idea of um all of this being a new purpose, which I kind of I broached this idea when we were prepping for this session. So so I do think that maybe this isn't necessarily a new purpose of design, but one that has been renewed. So I believe that design at its very core has always been an act of care and an act of intention. And that has existed in both our tangible and our intangible cultures for a very, very, very long time. So I read this about indigenous psychology, but I do think it applies to design. That design has existed before the term design and beyond the industry that we move in. So this means that design exists in places and spaces and people that won't call what they do design, and that won't always make money out of it. And in all of that, if it's good, it will almost certainly have been done with a lot of care. So all of that to say that maybe this new purpose isn't so much new, but renewed, because we are in such oblique and volatile era in the planet's life that requires us all to use what we know to avoid the very worst of scenarios and be a little braver than maybe we're comfortable being. So certainly that's true for me. My shift from the private to the public sector has been very uncomfortable because I came from the independent design space, and there is certainly a lot to adjust to. But yeah, I do think that because the world today demands so much of us, demands us to save ourselves, then we are all called to be braver than what we think we could be. And I guess that's what I try to do every day as well. The second point is about reclaiming design and well-being. So I also think that part of this renewed purpose is reclaiming what design is for us as Filipinos and reclaiming what well-being is for us in our culture. And I think it's a really, really important part in designing effectively in our context and for our people. So yes, that includes recognizing indigenous practices as design, and maybe our indigenous people won't call it design. Although I've done research with weaving communities, and they do take pride in calling themselves designers and artists. So it's important that we recognize these different generational crafts as design to be really empowering also to them. And even our vernacular urban practices. So I read this, I'm not sure if this article that recognizes yung mga kuya operating the photocopiers as designers also. So yeah, so it goes back to everybody is a designer, and everything can be designed. So again, reclaiming design means recognizing things that haven't been called design before and doing a careful study of Filipino culture, behaviors, beliefs, and how to design for all of that with a lot of respect and a lot of compassion for wisdoms that aren't similar to our own. And this also means understanding what the ultimate goal is in our context. So Abby mentioned designing for regeneration and well-being, and this is kind of what my MA thesis is about. So so my MA is in psych with a really strong application of Psicolohiang Pilipino, and I'm basically trying to figure out a framework on how to design for ginhawa, with ginhawa not being a direct parallel of well-being. And it is that and so much more. And just generally figuring out how Filipinos see the good life and how we can design for that. So the entire point is to not simply take Western concepts and models wholesale and assuming that they will apply to us. They could, very possible, but ultimately we won't know until we try it, until we study it. And for me, this decolonization and this indigenization, which is both kind of like a critiquing and a constructive, like a deconstructive and constructive process at the same time, is a big, big, big part of how we give back agency to Filipinos and quote unquote regular people to be designers of their own lives. When it comes to the government, so when it comes to understanding the role of government in all of this, I think it's really important for all government employees to recognize how much of a privileged position we are in, to be mandated by law, especially for us here at the Design Center, that we are mandated by law to find ways to use design for the good of the country. And this has actually always blown my mind that the Design Center exists at all and that it's 50 years old this year, which means that the Philippine government recognizes design in this way, that it recognizes the power of design in nation building, in sustainable development, in regenerative development, in all levels. So, yeah, I do see this job as a really big privilege. And because of that, there is a sense of responsibility and accountability in the trust that we are given to use taxpayer money in the best way possible. And in terms of what we do with that, well, the Design Center is a promotions agency overall. So everything we do in some way contributes to cultivating a deeper appreciation and eventually use of design. So that cuts across all the divisions of the Design Center, whether that's through materials and design research or the free design services we provide to MSMEs all over the country, the national design policy, which is on the way, or through the events that we mount like this one. So yeah, because the times are really, really bleak, and in connection to what our other panelists have mentioned today, I also see that, and I wrote this before this panel, I also see that the role of government is to be a beacon of hope. And yeah, I think design is also kind of a hopeful discipline by nature. You're always trying to make things better, no matter what better means. And I think it's our role as government to set up social structures and systems that will allow Filipino designers to design towards hope so that Filipinos can live with hope. And yeah, a big part of that is improving our current systems and practices, definitely questioning the status quo, things that have been running for a very long time, so that this giant institution of government can be more bottom up, more inclusive, more participative, and more empowering. And I do believe that everybody is a designer. I feel like this might be a contentious assertion to make, especially for like traditional designers. Maybe they see themselves as design experts, which they are. So also in Abby's concept note, there was something there about design experts being facilitators of this design process, which can happen to quote unquote regular people. So I do think that everybody is a designer, and as we design our everyday lives, and again, it is our job as government to facilitate this kind of agency and this kind of empowerment over our own lives. Sorry, it's so long.
But
Can I quickly react to
Yes, please.
what she said? No, because I was just listening to Bianca, to Cara, and to Car also. I'm just seeing like Bianca, Car, you were talking about how government is that beacon of hope, and the role of government is to actually set up the infrastructure and the system to actually allow more people to design. So that essentially is the scaling up work, right? Which is, I think, is super important because we need to have these regular infrastructure to hold the space for everyone to become a designer. And it's so interesting that Cara's work is about transforming collectives, transforming communities. And Bianca's work is about actually the transformation of the individual through the combination of the well-being and technology work that she's doing. I mean, I feel like in the room, you're addressing all three levels of transformation. So I really just like how this played out.
Right. Thank you so much.
You rated us quite well.
So actually, so now we come to the portion where it's going to be like a, like a fast Q&A. So you can all also ask each other any questions, but I guess I'll just try to start things off. I have a question for Bianca. So you mentioned that generally a lot of people, especially in the tech space, they seem to just simply create the same thing again and again. And I would assume it's because, they're working and designing within a certain ecosystem. Example, VCs, the tech industry, it's all about growth, IPOs, all of those things. But my question for you would be towards like that. at least by the way how I understand your work, it's more towards futures thinking. You're speculative design. You're thinking about what the future might be in 2050 and so forth. So how would you say would be at least what are your thoughts in terms of how can people imagine that hopeful future, at least given everything, especially the more like what Abby was sharing, the very pressing, urgent, scary, apocalyptic things that are happening right now, and yet for you to start imagining that possible positive future. So, and what if ever, what would be the designer's ability to be able to tell that story and inspire that kind of hope?
Yeah, it's a good question. Very loaded also. Well, like you mentioned earlier, I think you're absolutely right. The reason a lot of people design a lot of the same thing is because they operate within, very similar ecosystems. So yeah, I think it's two things. It's um, people tend to design based on the incentives that they're given to design a certain thing. And these incentives, I think, need to change for the most part. But also, apart from incentive, it's also inspiration. People make what they can imagine and they make what they see. I think anything that we make is really just a culmination of everything we've ever seen and believed. Um, and I think if, first we can think of different ways to or like maybe change these ecosystems that people design within, but also show people that other worlds are possible. And I think this is a huge um, thing that artists and creatives can contribute to, not just creatives that solve problems, but creatives that just make just imagine. Um, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Oh, Abby, you have something to say?
No, no, because you're right, Bianca, because this whole work that you do is really a lot of imagination. So I'm just really curious, like how do we actually expand our imagination, right? So I don't know, maybe Bianca, you could give us tips. Like for example, when you talk about creatives that just create not because to problem solve, right? That's imagining for things that are not, directly useful, right? But it starts there. And the stuff that we are using right now are actually stuff of science fiction, like from generations ago, right? So that is part of the imagination process. So Bianca, I don't know how do you actually go
That
about
is such a difficult question. I don't know if I'm even capable of answering that right now, to be honest. But I mean, if if we're taking, if let's say you're working in the tech space and you're, obviously building only from what you know, let's say, yeah, taking inspiration from science fiction, which a lot of the time is quite dystopian. Um, I think when you were giving your presentation and I saw the scaling up, out, and deep, I was like, oh, I definitely fall into the scaling deep category because that's literally all I do. Um, and I think it really starts from getting to know yourself. I don't know, for me, it's a kind of chicken and egg thing because when I tell stories through building worlds, and these worlds that I build not the are not ends in themselves. I use these worlds as tools to reflect on personally what I value and how I see the world, and to, yeah, kind of take apart, let's say, maybe my own personal biases and who I'm unconsciously designing for. And I think it's really like a circular loop of just creating and reflecting on what you make, and yeah, taking what you learn from yourself and making new things. And I think it's when you've really reflected on what you care about and who you are that you make things that are different from what everybody else is able to imagine.
I think she got it. So you got it, Bianca. I mean, when you say creating and reflecting and keeping that loop, actually just practicing creating and reflecting all the time. And I think that expands your imagination.
I kind of just wanted to add to that because like I recently read an article where it states that like we're living in an imagination battle crisis and that like we really need new stories. And like yeah, when you guys were talking about it, it just made me realize that when you're able to hear those stories of hope, then that's when we're able to imagine a better future. Like the stories that they usually share about the climate crisis are all doom stories where it's scaring you of what the future will look like. But then instead, if we shift our perspective towards a more hopeful one, kind of similar in what one of the diagrams that you mentioned, then it pushes us to imagine an even better world. One thing that we say in Local is like we're pushing for a solar punk future. Yeah, like this the steampunk movement, and now the new one is the solar punk future, where you're combining nature-based solutions with and with regenerative practices and with the progress. Like being able to work with nature, like being in an island, you see that these people have been working with nature, they live by nature, and they learn from nature. And kind of taking that out and then imagining how you can put that on a wider scale where people in the cities actually don't see the nature so much, so they don't really witness the impacts of the climate crisis. But when you share these local and grassroots perspectives, then we could really imagine this world. And like it's super cool what Bianca does, because like some people do have a hard time imagining things, but then Bianca's able to put that like in pictures and illustrations, and just like having more creatives and like designers like that, where people who have a difficult time imagining and don't know how to put it into phrase, like there are people like Bianca and like designers that do that, and I find that like super cool.
We can work together. How does that solar punk
Yeah, Bianca.
world look like?
I
In
love
a
what you,
metaverse.
I love what you said. I thought it was so like spot on because especially, since this is for designers, the World Industrial Design Day, I really think that, even just aesthetics are so loaded with meaning. And especially like a solar punk is an aesthetic, but it carries ideals like regeneration and sustainability. That's just very different from like cyberpunk or steampunk, which is what a lot of sci-fi is made of. Um, and so, yeah, I really super cool what you guys are doing.
Right.
Can I also
Yes.
just add really quickly, because I really appreciated that point about things that are visual carrying a lot of meaning. So there's always kind of like a lot of baggage in terms of, oh, we must go beyond the aesthetic and we must go beyond the visual. But the visual alone is already so powerful that, yeah, decisions that visual designers make are also loaded, very loaded with their own context and their own beliefs. So I just wanted to emphasize that point, that there's also a lot of weight in aesthetic decisions in pushing for certain agendas in this world. Yeah.
You can see that even in movies. I mean, example like probably Black Panther, just simply people seeing that visual of what that kind of society could have been, just simply inspires people like quite a long time. So wait, I have a question for Cara. So you mentioned how the people in the communities that you're working with, they become inspired and see like, oh, this is possible for that, and parang we can be designers, we can be problem solvers. But I do want to ask on what about the pushback? Is there any other entities or institutions who are supporting, if ever, the status quo, like just not being super local, not going with local practices? How do you that to communicate, or at least to change their paradigms towards like to follow your organization's and your community's vision of what can be?
I think it really then starts with the stories, like the stories of the people, because importantly, like we're designing for the people and planet. And when you share the stories of how people are living at the grassroots level, their experiences every day, and how we can design for a better tomorrow for them, then that kind of changes this perspective a little. I guess there is some pushback where people decide to stick with status quo because they rather be conservative, and they're scared of if they try to do something innovative that there might be pushback on that. But then I guess it's them bringing that back to that hopefulness, showing that even like these young people that we work with at the local level who are sharing their stories, that they just have as much as a voice as anyone. And it's really just bring everyone on the table, kind of be like us at Local, like we're really connecting like the local government, the national government, the community, and private donors, and everyone. We're all coming to a table together where we could co-create these solutions that everyone just has as much to share. And sometimes it is difficult. I mean, that like it is difficult, don't get me wrong. That's something that we're still trying to figure out. But then just, like these moments when you just see really like everyone coming together, it just really gets so exciting, because then you see that this vision that we have of a self-sustainable island is possible.
Avi, any response to that one?
No, I completely agree. You know that getting buy-in, um, getting buy-in and getting champions from partners or perhaps from those who do not have much trust into the program that you're introducing. It's very difficult. So I don't know. Maybe based on experience is really a lot of it is scaling deep work. Um, Having those transformational relationships, and it doesn't come overnight. You know, it is a lot of relationship building, and I think the work to be done is really nurturing those relationships and being able to find out, like, if this is a partner organization and we need buy-in and support from them, like who would be key or strategic individuals that are of influence to the bigger community. So perhaps I'm not sure if this is directly answering, but I'll just quickly share like one project that we did on fintech adoption in Pasig City, was to actually find out how come the adoption of fintech is so low. So we did an ethnographic research in Pasig City, and what we found out is the way that they are scaling the technology, whether it's GCash or PayMaya or any other fintech solution, is but by having trainers or champions from these different businesses to actually train the community, and it's not working. It's not working not because they don't understand it. It's not working because this person does not have an influence on them. And you only find out these things if you're actually in the community, if you ground yourself and you find out what are the levers of influence in this community. And what we found out that in these different barangays and villages, there are actually key individuals who are influencers. We're all familiar with social media influencers, and within these communities there are influencers, and you find that out because you stay on the ground, because you find out what is the power structure and what are the relationships within these communities. And if you actually start working with these influencers, getting their buy-in and having them champion the solution, then the success rate, I believe, is much higher. So that's why I feel like the work of scaling deep is super important.
Well, I'm going to build on what you're saying on levers. This one's for Car. So, Car, for designers who want to collaborate or work with the government, what would be those levers such that, like, for even if it's a single, could be student, could be someone who's taking their master's, any designer, innovator, problem solver, what would be those levers such that they can work, like they can work or collaborate with the government effectively? If you can give us at least some tips, because at least the way where I'm coming from would be, how can a designer communicate with the language of government?
Mm. Okay, well, I think first, in terms of how to get more designers involved with what we do here at DCP at the Design Center, I think it's really as simple as a letter. Yeah, really. In general, the agency is very open to collaboration. It's just a matter of finding the time and place for it. I think the second question is a whole other thing altogether, in terms of how to communicate stories and hope and imagination to legislators. That's just, we can't use those words really. So we have to find the right language that communicates the same hope, but that will get through to them. And we can't really fault them. It's their job to understand how these individual stories will apply at scale for the nation. So I really also believe in the power of storytelling, but it's always an uphill battle in terms of how to communicate this to other people who don't really know what design is, let alone what its value is. So it's always a translation of all of this, of everything that design stands for, to a language that policymakers and other heads of government agencies will understand. So quick plug that this is why design counts happened, among other things. Of course, it's part of our mandate. It's the first Philippine design economy mapping, and it came out with recommendations to for the formulation of the first national design policy. But I think it's just really important to put a number to the economic contribution of design, and that's like it was, I mean, I'm not the proponent of this project, so I can only speak so much about it. But I do think that putting a number to all of this that we're talking about is a very, very important way to talk to legislators. So, what the Design Counts team found was that the design economy contributes 1.2 trillion to our national GVA. So that's a really major part of our economy. So yeah, I think like what we were talking about earlier, the challenge is always how to translate these stories of hope and togetherness and community and regeneration. Like these words don't always work in the settings that we move in. So it's always a challenge for us here at the Design Center to communicate it with as much power and as much conviction to the government.
Yeah, I think I kind of just wanted to like give a tangible example of like something that we did at Local and with the government and everyone, like all the stakeholders coming together. So after the typhoon, about like more than half the trees of Inchagao fell, like 50% of the trees were gone. It looked so scary. Everything was brown. And I mean, reading on the wall of the design center, it says like the objective of design is to identify human needs. And I guess when everyone was rebuilding their homes, one thing that the locals started doing was utilizing the fallen trees and translating that into lumber. So what we did at Local was like we really tried to upscale that program and how could we use all the fallen trees, before they rot and bring that back and use that for all the houses we were building, instead of importing all these lumber and these rebuilding materials from outside of the region, what could be used that's existing on the land. And this is where the government then came in, the Philippine Coconut Authority, the Department of Natural Resources came in to help us start the first sawmill and meals program there. We worked with the farmers, and this was a way for them donating their fallen lumber to us. We then helped them clear their land so that they can start planting again. Then we had all these people like working together, bringing that to the lumber facility that we had. I mean, I knew nothing about wood then. And like I was entering these meetings and them all talking about like these dimensions and how to identify which coconut trees to use. Just learning that on the spot, and like even like these locals that we were working with, like learning them on the spot and then collaborating with these consultants who knew about these, and just like everyone coming together to find those solutions. And after that project, which operated for 4 months after the typhoon, in one municipality alone, we were really able to help rebuild schools, help build government facilities, help build homes with the material that was on the land. And like when you're able to explore that idea, show the locals also that this is possible, that you have these existing materials on the ground. You just have to find a way to innovate them and utilize them. And something as simple as, cocoa lumber. You could do that here. And now we transcended that project, which is called Coco Lab, into how we could utilize all parts of the coconuts into design. A lot of the times, like the coconut industry, the farmers are one of the poorest farmers in the Philippines, even though we're the second exporter in the world. And that kind of puzzled us a little. So we were like, how could we innovate them? Because now all they do is they just use copra, which is for coconut oil. But then you have the husk, you have the water, you have the meat. And usually the husk is even just thrown out. So now at Local, like we're trying to create that program and how we could create this research and development center for island communities in terms of utilizing all parts of the coconuts and also creating more value-adding products with that. And that one then comes like with what you were saying, where you have to get everyone involved to be able to create that tangible and sustainable change.
With everything that has been shared so far, I now pose a question back to Abby. So everything that has, at least as a non-designer, everything that has been shared so far, we don't really hear much about like example fonts or graphics or so. It's a lot about communication, thinking more strategically, winning over people to your side, communicating vision. What would be your advice to new designers right now on what are the most important skills that they need to develop immediately? And this might be within or outside of their current school curriculums.
Right. For me, it's definitely decolonization of our mental models. When I say decolonization is really expanding the mindsets or the frames or the lenses which we see the world. Because what happens in schooling, in traditional schooling, is that we are schooled in a certain way, in a certain discipline. And while that is good because you develop expertise, that could also be problematic because you tend to be siloed into that perspective. And when you go out into the world and you actually solve problems, problems are not siloed. They're interconnected. And a lot of times it's about talking to your neighbor, talking to a colleague or talking to a stranger and finding out, what's really happening. And you could not possibly empathize with them if you're very rigorous about the mental model that you have, right? So I feel like very important is to decolonize the way we see things. Better even if we could decolonize education. But if that seems so far-fetched, then, as a person, how could we expand? How could we expand the way we see the world, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying this one because sometimes, it is only perhaps the middle class or the upper class who could afford to do something like this. But I want to make this, when I say this, I want to make it also as accessible as possible. So it does not have to be formal schooling. Decolonizing and becoming more open is really just about having more conversations with people and keeping an open mind. And that could be free, right? I mean, having conversation with as many people, and not shallow conversations, right? But having these conversations on a regular basis and learning from these conversations is a form of expanding our mental model. So I feel like that is super important. And you know what? When you actually start doing that, your imagination also expands. So I feel like it's a process that's exponential in benefits. I hope I answered your question, Birdie.
You did. Well, so before I head off to my last question, does anyone want to ask anyone or toss anyone a question?
I guess I just wanted to add to what Abby was saying because it really sounds like, again, I'm bringing in my psych background in here, and it was also kind of discussed in the Philippine design gene discussions that I feel like maybe what Abby is talking about, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like a stronger sense of kapwa. And kapwa really in indigenous psych doesn't just recognize people as kapwa, but also recognizes nature as part of our kapwa. So I do think that identifying using a Filipino word, I mean, it's Tagalog, so that's another debate. But yeah, but like just using a more familiar language maybe to what Abby was saying is again a really important step in reclaiming our agency as Filipinos.
Completely agree. I mean, we reference back to, I think it was Catherine de Gia who talked about kapwa, right? And kapwa is not just a person, it could be nature itself, right? So that sense of kapwa is a way for us to expand our frames. And we have it in us as Filipinos.
And to just build on the theory of kapwa, like it really escalates. Like if you start with one person, it eventually means that when you recognize the shared, like the inherent dignity of a person and the inherent, like everybody is your kapwa, then designing for kapwa also means designing for justice all the time. So it escalates in that way when you're just the simple act of recognizing dignity in all people becomes that.
Maybe Birdie, I have a question for the young people and also for you, Ivan, as well. No, because I always think about this one, and in the work that I'm doing, every now and then we have the opportunity and the honor of facilitating conversations or facilitating training in where we actually mainstream the tools to becoming a designer and to having everyone actually become a designer. But it doesn't happen all the time. So I'm just curious. And whenever I have conversations with young people, they would always ask like, "Oh, what course did you take for you to actually become like who you are right now? Like what you do? What course should I take?" I mean, honestly, during my time, there was no specific course for this, but maybe now there is. Like Bianca took social design, right? So, but it sometimes I feel like it is not about the course. But so if it is not about a course or finding it in traditional education, I'm just wondering, like, how could we actually create this space wherein we could have more young people thrive and start practicing design on a regular basis? I mean, maybe you have ideas. I'm also looking at you, Car, because you are in government, right? So I feel like there's a huge burden on government to actually perhaps set up this space. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's somebody like Local Lab. who's actually you're doing it already, like, on a regular basis, you're setting up this space wherein more people could become designers. So I don't know, maybe just ideas on how to actually do this.
Maybe Bianca wants
I
to.
have an
idea.
idea.
Yes.
Please go,
I
Bianca.
mean, not really an idea, but just like a thought. I guess I will think out loud. um, yeah, no, I just honestly wish there were more resources in the Philippines to allow young creatives to just make what they want. I feel like with how education normally works is you have a set of courses that students can choose from. They pick a track and they go. But I think that these courses in themselves, they come out of, for example, social design. That didn't, courses like that didn't exist a couple of years ago. But it's like, you know, these things emerge because people do them and they do them because they need them. And I feel like if we can do this more and just let people do what they think that they need or what they want to do, then these kind of new um new practices just kind of emerge naturally.
I like that one. Places of just making, places of making, right?
Yeah.
And could be making anything, right? Okay. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also for me interesting to look at, you know, because a lot of people will be interested in doing a lot of different things. And, instead of, I think it's we're doing it a little bit the other way around versus, okay, you have an industrial design program and, this is the track, blah, blah, blah. But then you can also just give people the freedom to do what they want and see what emerges and make sense of that after. Um, and I think a lot of the time there's a common thread between what a lot of people like work on. And I guess that is how programs kind of come to be.
Um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to build on that, Birdie. I mean, when you actually talk about places of making, I'm actually imagining every barangay would have a place of making. And, probably one place of making could be every barangay is supposed to have a materials recovery facility, right? An MRF facility, but not every barangay has. But by law, every barangay should have. I mean, I feel like it's such a it could be such a fertile place. You have all sorts of materials. What can I do with these materials? And perhaps it's not something tangible that you want to work on as well. Perhaps it's writing, right? But maybe you have this space where you have an MRF facility and you probably have more seasoned designers or creatives to have sessions or days, how do you say, office hours in that facility to actually start mentoring others. I feel like it's something that could grow at a very micro and actionable level, which is a barangay level. So I agree with you, Bianx.
If I, if I can add, that's actually a framework I was following before on how, again, how do you create change at scale? So it's basically following. It's saying you look at rules, tools, and norms. So rules, tools, norms. Example, rules: are the kids allowed to make mistakes? Again, in school, you make mistakes, you're penalized. So are you allowed to spend your free time doing something else apart from just simply doing your homework or doing certain things? So yun muna, what are the rules? What are the incentives? Tools would be, do you have that makerspace? Do they have internet access? Do they have access to, again, let's say, all the things that are on the internet, or the devices that they can use to be able to experiment and explore their creativity? And finally would be the norm. Norm would be parang, I mean, that kind of shaming, that smart shaming, or parang will their parents actually be open to their kids exploring careers outside of the typical maging like follow this career path na stable degree, stable, ganyan, pero are they willing to let them explore and try out something new? And again, is it something na they will not be ostracized by their peers and so on. So I think it's not just simply in tools lang, but having those other things in place that can allow those kids to really explore any mga possibilities nila.
Right. So now we're building on the rules, tools, and norms from these maker spaces. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add, like in barangays, like for example in Chagawal over, you have these community waiting sheds, right? And you see like from the elderly, tricycle drivers, youth just waiting in those sheds randomly. And that's like one thing that we started doing more in Chagao, building these community spaces. Just a super simple structure, just with a roof. But then you see that there's so many people from the barangay always just coming together there. So I feel like that could be a space where these conversations are shared. I think it kind of leads back to where you talked about like having an influencer in that barangay where that someone could push forward these conversations, and aside from the chismes and marites that they usually do, kind of give them the tools for them to think deeper. I think one thing that I notice a lot at the community level is that they don't feel that their voices or their insights are as important. So maybe that's why they're not having these conversations, because to them, they're like, who are we to create this change, right? So it also kind of goes back to that, like giving them that confidence to know that their voice is important, having the tools and all those things that you mentioned also. And just like having these conversations more often is where we could find the solutions.
Ooh, we hope to see a prototype of the maker sheds.
All right. So with that, we now head to the final question. So this one, again, this is for everyone, and we can keep like a very quick, brief answer. So the Design Center is celebrating its 50th year of harnessing design as a force for good. What do you think is design's next promise? So we'll start with Abby.
Oh my God. What is design?
What is design's next promise? Again, in a very very short answer.
Anything about it. I think I'm just going to repeat back what we've been discussing so far. Um, I think it's going back to our roots, going back to the quote unquote basics that we have forgotten, giving everybody the agency to design and the competencies to design as well. And like I said earlier, I do think maybe that design's next new promise would be to recognize the inherent dignity of Filipinos.
Cara?
That was a really good answer. Don't have to follow that up. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's like really just recognizing the individuals and how everyone really has just something important to share, you know. Like that could be where design goes next. That everyone, that what you're saying, that everyone is a designer. I mean, yeah, like showing them that they're capable of that. And then that's how we find solutions.
Bianca?
I would say that maybe now design is kind of like a beacon of hope and agency. Um, Earlier this week, I read this blog post of another futurist. Her name is Geraldine Wary, and she talked about, or she wrote about the difference between radical hope and synthetic optimism. The difference being that, given the state of the world right now, we have to be hopeful because it's all we have, as opposed to being blindly optimistic about, these technologies are emerging when it's nascent. That's the time that it's best to reflect on them and be critical because, before it's too late or before it becomes too difficult to pivot and change trajectory. But yeah, and like going back to, I'm gonna reference all of you guys, but like going back to what you guys said, for example, being brave, using your agency, that I think comes from having hope in the first place, that a better world is possible. And also, referencing, I think this is what I'm going to close with, like referencing what Cara said, a simple roof makes collaboration possible. And I think that's what design ought to be right now.
And back to you, Abby.
And to me, because I say in my presentation, the new and urgent purpose of design is to build individual agency. So I'm assuming that's going to happen now. From now moving forward, that is already happening. And so for me, the promise then is that would be the future scenario, would be really a well-being of a person. And when I say a well-being of a person, it's deeply connected to well-being of the planet. I envision a time in the future when we think about our own well-being, it's not compromising the planet. And we are in such a like I said, a volatile age, because the number of young people who have mental health challenges, and not just young people, even middle-aged and senior citizens who are actually going through loneliness. I think the numbers are so high. That's why for me, it's a very urgent thing that we need to address. And sometimes technology is not helping. And sometimes technology is able to help. So I feel like when we actually build that individual agency, the challenge for us really is to address that big problem of individual wellness. How could we actually get there so we could become better person and create better things?
All right. Well, if I may try to summarize everything that we have been sharing so far. So on the new purpose of design, Abby, you started off by sharing again the urgent challenges of the world today. So again, a lot of systemic challenges which no single person can solve, and it feels unsolvable given the complexity and sabay-sabay pa lahat ng mga problems na to. And yet, your message is again the individual agency. Like a single person, a single designer can have an impact in some way of some sort. And as you were sharing through their bravery, through their courage, as seen with all of the other speakers and reactors that we have, a single person's efforts and work can have a ripple effect. It can lead to a movement, an organization. It can lead to new creations, and again, to inspire bravery in others. And it is, again, even though a system might seem so immovable, again, systems are made individual at the core level, it's made of people. And if every single person does their own thing at the same time for a long period of time, then the needle will move. Things can change. And I guess at least that's where I hope comes from. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again. I'd like to thank our keynote speaker and our reactors for such an enriching discussion that foregrounds the new and emerging roles of design in enabling a future that we all want. So at this point, we'd like to invite everyone to fill out our feedback form, which you can access through the QR code or the link on your screen, and we'll be able to give attendance certificates to those who attended. So again, thank you so much to everybody for being here today, our speakers, Ms. Ria, our attendees, and the Design Center team. We'd also like to thank our partners who made this event possible, so World Design Organization, Kind Mind Experience Design, and Curiosity Design Research. Now, before we all go, let's all take a photo. So where do we... Saan niyo... Ayun.
My part.
Si Bianca,
Bianca, thank you.
ipa-photoshop ba?
But I just smile anyway.
All right. So thank you so much again for joining us today. I'm Birdie Salva, and this has been IDxConversations Design's New Purpose.